In a grand, sprawling palace on the distant planet of Galdria, excitement filled the air. The galaxy was abuzz, eagerly awaiting the wedding of Princess Zira, the crown jewel of the Galderian Empire. The sun shone brightly, casting its golden rays over the royal courtyard, where grand banners fluttered in the wind and delicate flowers bloomed in honor of the occasion. It was a wedding like no other, an event that would be talked about for centuries to come. Princess Zira was the pride of her people. Her beauty was legendary, her intelligence unmatched, and her grace unmatched by any other royal in the galaxy. Today, all of that would culminate in the most extravagant wedding the universe had ever seen. She was to marry Prince Alaric, a highly respected and well-known leader from the neighboring planet of Eridora. Their union was not just one of love, but also of politics, a merging of two powerful families that would bring peace and prosperity to both empires. Zira stood before a mirror in her dressing room, adjusting the delicate silver tiara that rested upon her head. Her gown, crafted from the finest silk, shimmered under the light as if woven from the stars themselves. The embroidery of gold and diamonds caught every angle of the light, reflecting the rich history and legacy she represented. Her long flowing hair was braided with strands of rare jewels, and her deep violet eyes gleamed with excitement and a hint of nervousness. Though the weight of the world was on her shoulders, she couldn't help but smile at the thought of what this day would bring. The atmosphere outside was nothing short of magical. Guests from all corners of the galaxy had gathered, their ships filling the skies above the palace. Some had come for political reasons, others out of respect for the royal family, but all were eager to witness the union of Princess Zira and Prince Alaric. The royal musicians played a harmonious melody as the guests filtered into the grand hall, their eyes wide with awe as they beheld the exquisite beauty of the palace. The entire city of Galdria had been transformed for the event. Streets were lined with shimmering lights, and flowers from all over the galaxy filled every corner of the city. The air was thick with the scent of fresh blooms, and the people of Galdria watched with bated breath as the wedding ceremony began. The royal procession was an extraordinary sight. Princess Zira walked down the grand staircase, her gown trailing behind her in a wave of shimmering fabric. Her heart raced in her chest as she descended, but she kept her composure, her regal poise, unwavering. At the bottom of the stairs stood her groom, Prince Alaric, a handsome man with jet black hair and piercing blue eyes. He looked every bit the perfect match for the princess, tall and strong, with a noble presence that commanded respect. As Zira approached Alaric, the crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the palace. The guests marveled at the sight of the two royals standing side by side, the perfect match, each one the embodiment of their respective empires. It seemed like the perfect fairy tale, a story that would be remembered forever. But little did they know, this was not the story that was about to unfold. The grand hall fell silent as the high priest, a venerable figure draped in shimmering robes, raised his hands. His voice boomed through the hall as he began to speak the ancient words that had marked countless royal weddings before. Today, we unite the hearts of two powerful families to bring peace and prosperity to our worlds, he began. Princess Zira, daughter of the Galderian Empire, and Prince Alaric, son of the Eridoran throne, are joined by the stars above. As the priest spoke, Zira glanced around the hall, taking in the faces of the guests. She had always dreamed of this day of the wedding that would solidify her family's legacy. She had dreamed of a future with Prince Alaric, a future of peace, stability, and mutual respect between their two worlds. But just as the priest prepared to continue, an unexpected interruption stopped him mid-sentence. A figure, dressed in a simple yet striking uniform, stepped forward from the crowd. The silence that followed was deafening. The stranger's identity was unknown to the guests, and the murmur of confusion began to ripple through the crowd. The man was tall, but his features were nothing like those of the alien royals. His skin was fair, his eyes a deep shade of brown, and his clothes seemed out of place in the majestic surroundings. He was human. The high priest paused, his eyes narrowing as he regarded the man. The sudden appearance of a human in such a prestigious setting was nothing short of a scandal. Galdria had never welcomed humans into their royal courts, and the thought of one being a part of such a sacred ceremony was unfathomable. Zira's heart skipped a beat as her gaze locked with the stranger's. Something in her chest fluttered. She didn't know why, but there was something about him that felt different. His presence, though strange, was oddly comforting. She shook her head, pushing the thought aside. This was her wedding day, and she was meant to marry Prince Alaric. But, as the priest raised his hand and looked toward the crowd, he made a shocking declaration. "This human," he said, his voice steady but filled with a sense of awe, "is the one whom the stars have chosen for Princess Zira." The words hung in the air, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Gasps filled the room. The guests exchanged confused glances, and whispers began to spread like wildfire. How could this be? A human, a species so different from the Galdarians, had been chosen to marry their princess? The high priest continued, his tone unshaken by the chaos that had erupted in the hall. "The stars themselves have guided us to this moment, and we must not deny what fate has set in motion. Princess Zira, your true groom stands before you, not as an alien, but as someone chosen by destiny." Zira's heart raced as her world shifted around her. The reality of the situation settled in her mind, but the confusion and disbelief still gripped her. How could this be happening? What was she supposed to do now? The princess stood frozen, her thoughts racing as the eyes of the galaxy rested on her. Would she accept this unforeseen twist of fate? Would she marry the human chosen by the stars? Or was this some kind of grand misunderstanding? In that moment, Zira realized that her wedding day was no longer the fairy tale she had imagined. It was something entirely different, a story of unexpected twists of love and of a future that no one could have predicted. The fate of two worlds now hung in the balance, and everything would change from this moment on. The grand hall was now filled with an eerie silence, so thick it felt almost suffocating. The revelation hung in the air like an unbearable weight. The guests exchanged bewildered glances, their mouths agape, trying to comprehend what had just transpired. A human, someone from an entirely different world, had been declared the groom of Princess Zira. It was unthinkable, scandalous even. The very idea of a human standing at the altar of the royal Galdarian palace was almost beyond belief. But there he was, standing tall and still, his eyes locked with Princess Zira's, as though he had known this moment was coming all along. Zira's heart hammered in her chest as her gaze moved from the human to the faces of her family, her fellow royals, and the guests in attendance. Her father, King Argon, stood frozen, his expression unreadable but filled with tension. Her mother, Queen Alara, looked on in stunned disbelief, her face pale, and her hands clasped tightly in front of her. For the first time in her life, Zira saw fear in the eyes of the people she had always admired. Fear not of an enemy or a battle, but of something far more unsettling. Change. "Princess Zira, the stars have spoken," the high priest's voice rang out, his words laced with an authoritative calmness. He turned toward the princess, his eyes filled with an odd mix of reverence and certainty. "You must honor what fate has decreed. The one chosen by the stars is the one meant for you." The human stood silently, his expression a mixture of confusion and shock. His name was Ethan. He had never imagined that a day would come when he would stand in the heart of an alien kingdom, chosen to marry a princess from another world. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear or excitement, but from the sheer absurdity of the situation. He had come to the palace as a foreign diplomat, sent to establish peaceful relations between Earth and the Galdarian Empire. He had never expected to find himself standing in the middle of a royal wedding, especially not as the groom. Zira's mind was spinning, the world around her spinning with it. The reality of the situation slowly began to sink in. The high priest had said it clearly. The stars had chosen Ethan. But how? Why? Zira could feel her pulse racing, her hands trembling as she reached for the delicate folds of her wedding gown. Was this some kind of cruel joke, She had prepared for a marriage to Prince Alaric, someone who shared her values, someone who understood the weight of their empire's expectations. Yet here she was, staring at a human who had no place in her world, no knowledge of her people's traditions, and no right to be standing in the midst of such an important ceremony. But as she looked into Ethan's eyes, something shifted. There was no malice in his gaze, no arrogance, just a deep sense of bewilderment and confusion. He was as much a victim of this strange twist of fate as she was. Zira could see the uncertainty written across his face, the confusion as he tried to make sense of this surreal moment. He was just as lost in this as she was. "Your Highness." Ethan's voice broke through the tension. It was soft, almost hesitant, but there was a sincerity in it that made Zira pause. I don't know what this means. I'm just here to help, to represent my people, to bridge the gap between our worlds. I never thought I would be part of this, but if this is what's meant to be, I'll try my best. I just want to understand." His words were genuine, and Zira felt a strange tug in her chest. She had expected to feel anger, to feel betrayed by this turn of events, but instead, she found herself strangely drawn to Ethan's sincerity. He wasn't here to cause trouble, to tear her world apart. He was just as much a pawn in this unfolding drama as she was. There was something unspoken between them, a shared understanding of the chaos that had just unraveled their lives. The murmurs in the room were growing louder, filled with disbelief, confusion, and anger. The royal guests, the dignitaries, and the high-ranking officials of the Galderian Empire were not used to such unpredictability. They were accustomed to order, to carefully planned events, and to the idea that the royal family's choices were divine, guided by tradition and the stars themselves. The very idea that a human, an outsider, would be placed at the center of this sacred ceremony was a direct challenge to everything they had ever believed in. The king's voice broke through the whispers. "Enough!" His voice, though firm, trembled slightly. "This is not a matter of choice, but a matter of fate. The stars have chosen, and we must honor their will." But his words did little to calm the crowd. The tension in the air was palpable. Some guests were visibly shaken, while others seemed ready to protest. The situation was spiraling out of control. Zira could feel her heart racing. She had always been taught that the royal bloodline was sacred, that her duty was to her people and to the future of the Galderian Empire. This marriage was meant to strengthen that bond, to forge a future where the Galderians and their allies would live in harmony. But now the very foundation of that future was in question. Could she truly marry someone from Earth? Could she truly accept a human as her partner? As Zira stood there, her mind raced with the weight of her decision. Her father had always told her that she must put duty above all else. But now, standing before Ethan, she realized that duty was not the only thing that mattered. Her heart whispered something else, something she couldn't quite put into words. Ethan's eyes met hers again, filled with the same uncertainty. The room was still, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. And yet in that moment, Zira saw a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Hope. A strange feeling, something unfamiliar, but undeniably real. The twist had been revealed. The unexpected had come to pass. And now Zira had a choice to make, not just as a princess, but as a woman who, for the first time, had the chance to define her own destiny. Would she reject the star's decision, or would she embrace the unexpected twist that had thrown her life into turmoil? The silence in the room was deafening as Zira looked from Ethan to the high priest, to her parents, and back to the man who had somehow become her groom. The weight of the decision hung heavy on her shoulders, but one thing was certain: nothing, in her life or the universe, would ever be the same again. The grand hall fell into an uneasy silence as Princess Zira stood there, her mind in a whirlwind of emotions. The situation was beyond comprehension. Her wedding, the most important event of her life, had taken a turn she could never have imagined. The room was filled with confusion, disbelief, and judgment. The guests whispered among themselves, their faces etched with skepticism, and some even exchanged glares of disdain. It was as though the very air had shifted, no longer filled with celebration, but with an uncertain tension that seemed to press against Zira's chest. Ethan stood by her, side still in shock, trying to make sense of everything. His hands were trembling and his heart raced in his chest. This was supposed to be a diplomatic mission, an exchange to strengthen ties between Earth and the Galderian Empire. But now he found himself at the center of a royal wedding as the chosen groom of a princess he had never met before. His heart was heavy with confusion and uncertainty. What had he done to deserve this? How could he possibly fulfill the expectations placed upon him, let alone win the heart of a princess from another world? As the guests continued to murmur, Zira turned toward him. Their eyes met, and for the briefest of moments, the world around them seemed to fade away. Ethan's expression was full of sincerity, and yet there was a deep sadness in his eyes. Perhaps he was just as lost as she was. Despite the chaos surrounding them, there was a strange, almost magnetic connection between them. Zira felt it, though she could not explain it. In that brief exchange of glances, she saw something in him that she had never expected: vulnerability. For a brief moment, her eyes softened, but she quickly turned away, pulling herself back into the rigid role she had been trained to play. As the princess, she had responsibilities, duties that transcended personal feelings. She was to marry a prince, someone of her own kind, someone who could help secure the future of her people. She could not afford to lose focus now, not when the fate of an empire rested on her shoulders. The high priest, still standing at the altar, cleared his throat, his voice echoing in the quiet hall. "Princess Zira, Ethan, you must now begin the ceremony. It is time for you both to prove your worth. This union is no mere accident. The stars have chosen this moment for a reason." Zira felt a pang of frustration rise in her chest. This was not how it was supposed to be. She had dreamt of a different future, a future where love and duty were not at odds. But now, standing before this human, she wasn't sure what she was supposed to feel. Her heart tugged in a direction she couldn't understand, and a small part of her didn't want to fight it. But another part of her, her royal duty, her upbringing, told her that this union was nothing more than a mistake. A complication that threatened to destroy everything her family had worked for. Ethan, sensing her struggle, spoke up. "I know this is confusing for both of us," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I don't belong here. I'm not like the others in this room, but I'm willing to try. I know this is all beyond what either of us expected, but I promise I'll do my best to respect your traditions, to respect you." His words cut through the tension in the room, and for the first time, Zira's heart did something unexpected. She felt something shift inside her, something warm and real. It wasn't the political marriage she had prepared for, but there was something in Ethan's voice, in his sincerity, that made her pause. Perhaps there was more to this moment than she had thought. The guests were still watching, waiting for some sort of confirmation. Zira's mind raced. What should she do? Was this truly her fate? Was she to ignore the deep connection she felt with this human, or was she supposed to embrace it, despite all that it meant? She couldn't ignore the fact that Ethan had been chosen by the stars, just as the priest had said. But was this really what the stars had meant for her? Was this the path she was supposed to walk? As the priest gestured for them to step forward, Zira hesitated. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders, the weight of an empire, of her family's legacy, and her own heart, which was pulling her in directions she couldn't understand. She had always been taught to follow the rules, to do what was expected of her. But what if those rules were wrong? What if the real lesson was not to fight against fate, but to embrace the unknown? The room seemed to hold its breath as Zira finally stepped forward, her hand trembling slightly as she extended it to Ethan. It was a simple gesture, one that should have been expected. But in that moment, it felt like an enormous step. Ethan took her hand, his grip warm and firm, and she felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. It was the first time she had felt truly connected to him, and for the briefest of moments, she wasn't thinking about the political implications, the responsibilities of being a princess or the expectations of her people. She was just a woman standing next to a man sharing a moment of raw, unfiltered honesty. "I don't know where this path will lead," Zira said softly, her voice trembling. "But I won't deny it. I feel something here. Something I can't explain." Ethan nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "I feel it too. And I'll do whatever it takes to prove that I'm worthy of this. Of you. I know I'm not from your world, but maybe that's what makes us stronger. Maybe it's time for both of our worlds to come together." His words struck a chord deep within her, and for the first time since this journey began, Zira allowed herself to believe in something other than duty. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that for the first time, her heart was telling her to take a step forward, to let go of the fear and uncertainty that had held her back. As they stood there, hand in hand, Zira realized that the greatest battle wasn't against her family's expectations or the galaxy's doubts. It was against her own fears. The fears of a future that seemed impossible, of a love that seemed out of reach. But perhaps, just perhaps, this unexpected connection was the key to unlocking something greater than she had ever imagined. And as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she felt a sense of hope rising within her. This might be the most difficult path she had ever faced, but it was one she would walk willingly, with the man who, against all odds, had become her chosen partner. The grand hall was quieter now, the weight of the moments that had passed hanging in the air. What had started as a shocking twist had somehow turned into something unexpected, a new chapter neither Princess Zira nor Ethan could have foreseen. The guests who had once whispered in confusion and disbelief now watched with bated breath, waiting for what would come next. Zira stood beside Ethan, her hand still in his, the warmth of his touch grounding her in a way she had never experienced before. The world outside the palace and even the expectations of her royal lineage seemed to fade into the background. In the midst of it all, she had found something more precious than she had ever imagined. A connection that transcended worlds, a bond that was born from the most unlikely of circumstances. As the ceremony continued, the high priest stepped forward again, this time with a smile on his face. His earlier seriousness had melted into a quiet joy, as though he too had begun to understand the significance of this moment. The stars had not just chosen any groom for Princess Zira, they had chosen a man who would help her change the course of history. Zira's father, King Argon, who had remained silent through most of the ceremony, now stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the couple before him. His face was hard to read, a mixture of royal duty and personal pride. The king had long believed in tradition, in maintaining the empire's power and alliances, but now, standing before him, was his daughter, with a man who was not an alien, not a royal, but a human from another world. For a moment, Zira thought he might speak against the union, to deny what was happening, but instead, he took a deep breath and looked at her with something that resembled acceptance. "Zira," the king began, his voice deep and resonant. "In all my years, I never thought I would see this day, a human chosen by the stars, a union between our worlds. But I see now that this is not a matter of chance. It is fate, and it is love. If this is the path you wish to walk, then I will not stand in your way. I give you my blessing." The words were simple, but they held so much power. For the first time, Zira felt the weight of her royal responsibilities begin to lift. Her father, the powerful king of Galdria, was acknowledging something that transcended duty. He was giving her permission to follow her heart, to make a choice that was hers alone to make. Tears welled up in Zira's eyes as she turned to Ethan. She had spent so much of her life following orders, adhering to the rules of her empire, but in that moment she realized that the greatest strength came not from fulfilling obligations, but from embracing her own desires, her own path. She had found it in Ethan, a man from another world who had not only chosen her but had also proven that love had the power to defy all boundaries. Ethan smiled, his eyes full of gratitude and something deeper, something Zira could see now. His respect, his love. I'm not from your world, Zira. I didn't belong here, but somehow I've found a place by your side. I don't know how to explain it, but I know I'm here for a reason, and I'll spend every day proving that I'm worthy of you, of this." The guests, still stunned by the turn of events, now began to applaud softly. It wasn't the loud, thunderous applause of a traditional royal wedding, but rather a quiet acknowledgement of something real, something profound. This was not just a union of two people, but the beginning of something far greater, a union of worlds, of cultures, and of hearts. As Zira and Ethan stood together at the altar, the sky outside the palace began to change, as though the universe itself was responding to the union. The stars twinkled brighter, their light shining through the grand windows of the hall. The air grew warmer, as if the galaxy was welcoming the new bond between these two worlds. The high priest raised his hand, signaling the final moment of the ceremony. "By the power vested in me and by the will of the stars, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Zira's heart raced as she turned to Ethan. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. With a deep breath, she leaned in, her heart pounding in her chest, and kissed Ethan softly on the lips. The kiss was gentle, yet it spoke volumes, of love, of trust, and of a future that no one could predict, but one they would face together. The hall erupted into cheers, but Zira and Ethan were lost in each other. They no longer felt the weight of the eyes upon them, the expectations of their worlds. All that mattered in that moment was the simple truth. They had chosen each other, and that was enough. As the crowd began to celebrate, Zira looked out over the sea of faces. Her heart swelled with pride, not for the title she held or the empire she was meant to rule, but for the life she was about to build with Ethan. A life where love would always come first. A life where boundaries didn't matter, and where the heart led the way. The wedding had not gone as anyone had expected, but in the end it was more than anyone could have dreamed. It wasn't just a union of two people. It was the union of two worlds, two species, and two hearts that had found each other against all odds. As the evening wore on, and the stars above continued to shine brightly, Zira and Ethan danced together, their hearts light, their spirits high. They were no longer the princess and the human. They were simply Zira and Ethan, a couple bound by love, ready to face whatever the future held together. And in that moment, under the starlit sky, Zira knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The unexpected twist had led them here to a future they could never have imagined, but one they would build together. And it was beautiful.